Evening descends upon the rolling hills of Fort Payne, Alabama. The last light of day spills across the cotton fields, where the wind drifts through the trees and carries the faint sound of a lonely guitar. In that stillness, they say, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the voice of a man who once made all of America stop and listen. That voice did not come from the glittering streets of Nashville, nor from the polished walls of grand recording studios. It came from the red soil, from the calloused hands of working people, from the heart of a boy raised among the southern fields, a boy who would one day be known as Randy Owen. He was the lead singer of Alabama, the band that redefined the sound of modern country music. They carried the spirit of the South, blended with touches of pop and rock, and brought country beyond the borders of Nashville to millions of listeners around the world. Throughout the 1980s, Randy's voice echoed everywhere. From sold-out stadiums to the old radios inside pickup trucks rumbling across the southern highways. People called him the soul of Alabama, the man who turned country music into the heartbeat of a generation. But then, amid all that glory, one day, the voice went silent. No farewell concert, no official announcement, only canceled shows, unused tickets, and millions of fans left wondering, what happened to Randy Owen? Behind the gentle smile and soft southern eyes of that man lay another story. A quiet battle with illness, a string of personal losses, and years spent slowly retreating from the spotlight. A man who had once sung for millions of hearts was suddenly forced to learn how to sing in silence. From a poor farm boy in Fort Payne to an icon of American music, and finally, an aging man watching the sunset over the same land where it all began, Randy Owen had walked through it all: glory, sorrow, and revelation. The story you are about to hear is not just the journey of a singer, but the song of a life, where country music is not merely sound, but the way a soul finds its light after the darkest nights. And it all began with a boy, an old wooden guitar, and a small hill in Alabama. In the quiet countryside of Fort Payne, Alabama, mornings began with the crow of roosters and the scent of damp earth after a night of rain. There, a skinny boy with messy hair and bright eyes often sat on the porch, strumming a borrowed guitar from his uncle. His name was Randy Owen. Born on December 13, 1949, he grew up in poverty, but in a home filled with music and faith. His parents worked long days on a small cotton and cattle farm, their rough, weathered hands teaching him two things: never be afraid of hard work, and never stop believing in God. Music didn't come to Randy through schools or studios. It came from the church gatherings, where community voices rose together beneath the glow of candlelight, and from the old radio in the kitchen that played the voices of Hank Williams, Jim Reeves, and Lefty Frizzell. On scorching summer days, when the Alabama sun burned across the cotton fields, Randy worked alongside his father, humming little melodies to chase away the fatigue. It was honest, humble music, the kind that would later become his soul's signature. But poverty weighed heavily on his young life, interrupting his education. By ninth grade, Randy dropped out of school, discouraged, thinking his future would begin and end on that farm. Then one day, his principal, who saw something extraordinary in the boy, came to his home and said, "Randy, if you give up on your dream now, you'll never know what you were meant to be." Those words changed his life. He returned to school, finished his studies, and in 1969 he graduated, becoming the first member of the Owen family to ever earn a diploma, a moment of pride that still echoes through his family's history. While his friends dreamed of stable jobs, Randy chose another path, one paved with red dust, smoky bars, and sleepless nights. He carried an old guitar, a handful of songs he'd written himself, and a faith that music could carry a poor Alabama farm boy to anywhere in the world. During those restless years, he reconnected with his cousins, Teddy Gentry and Jeff Cook. Three young men bound by blood and a shared dream sat together in a small barn and made a promise to bring the sound of the South beyond the hills of their hometown. They didn't know it yet, but that simple promise would write a new chapter in the history of country music. It was the early 1970s. Three young men from Fort Payne began traveling across the American South with little more than a few old guitars, a beat-up pickup truck, and dreams far bigger than the roads they traveled. Randy Owen, Teddy Gentry, and Jeff Cook called their band Wild Country, a simple name that carried the wild, untamed spirit of the land they came from. They played anywhere people were willing to listen. Smoky bars thick with laughter and cheap whiskey, tiny county fairs under flickering lights, and long, lonely nights in half-empty taverns where only a few drunks nodded off at the tables. Money was scarce, often not even enough to fill the gas tank, but Randy kept singing with everything he had. For him, music wasn't about fame. It was about survival. Those years were a long, grinding struggle, sleeping in the truck, living on instant noodles, and more than once wondering if it was time to give up. Yet in that poverty, they found something priceless: loyalty and unshakable faith in one another. Randy was the heart that kept them going. When things fell apart, he would say, "We haven't reached the end of the road yet. Let's keep singing even if no one's listening." Sometimes they were invited to play small shows in Nashville, and there, Randy began to feel the pulse of a bigger dream. But Nashville back then was a closed world, full of stars and record labels that didn't care about three unknown boys from Alabama. They were rejected, dismissed, even mocked. One producer sneered, "Who's gonna listen to country music that sounds like rock?" But Randy believed differently. He believed country wasn't just steel guitars and sad stories. It was emotion, blood, and heart. He wanted to push country beyond its borders, to blend it with pop and southern rock, to make young people hear themselves in it. In 1977, after nearly a decade of chasing a fading dream, they gathered what little money they had left to record a few demo tracks. One of them was My Home's in Alabama. It was raw, sincere, and filled with the soul of everything they had lived. That song became their introduction to the world, the first door that would eventually lead them to a deal with RCA Records a few years later. From nights playing to a handful of people, Randy and his two cousins had carried their dream across half of America, stage by stage, town by town, until one day they would no longer be the unknown Wild Country, but Alabama, the name that would shake the foundations of country music itself. Late afternoon fell over Nashville, 1980. Inside a small recording studio, Randy Owen closed his eyes and let his voice pour gently into an old microphone. Outside, a light rain tapped softly on the tin roof, but inside, the music was coming alive. After nearly a decade wandering through uncertainty, the boys from Fort Payne had finally touched their dream. When My Home's in Alabama hit the radio waves, listeners across the South fell silent. That deep, warm, and soulful voice sounded like no one else. It carried the breath of soil, of grass, of people who worked hard and loved harder. Randy didn't sing to be famous. He sang as if telling the story of the entire American South. From that moment, everything began to change. They signed with RCA Records and officially became Alabama, a name both simple and sacred, like the land that gave them life. Then came Tennessee River, Feels So Right, Love in the First Degree, Mountain Music. Each song a wave, carrying the warmth of the South across the nation. Their sound wasn't just country. It was a blend of pop, rock, and gospel, the rhythm of real lives and real hearts. On stage, Randy Owen stood beneath the lights, the glow reflecting off his sun-browned face. His voice rose strong and tender, proud and pure. People didn't just listen, they felt it. Through his singing, they heard their own struggles, their own pride. Throughout the 1980s, Alabama dominated the charts. Over 40 top 10 singles, millions of records sold, and thousands of sold-out shows. They became the first country band to command the kind of influence once reserved for rock legends. Randy, the farm boy who once sang under the Alabama sun, had become the voice of America, the symbol of Southern pride. Yet while the world celebrated them as superstars, Randy never let go of who he was. After every tour, he returned to his farm, kicked off his boots, and walked barefoot through the grass, listening to the distant call of cattle. "This is the real music," he said softly. In the wind of Alabama, he remained the same, simple, humble, and endlessly grateful. When asked what made Alabama different, Randy smiled and answered, "We never tried to be different. We just sing what we've lived." And maybe that's why their music reached so deeply into people's hearts. Because it was built from truth, from faith, from the soul of home. From small-town stages to bright city lights, Randy Owen had carried country music to a new height. But at the peak of glory, he began to feel the shadows creeping in behind the spotlight. Because sometimes, it's the brightest light that makes us lose sight of ourselves. After years of dazzling triumph, when cheers still roared through sold-out arenas, few knew that behind Randy Owen's gentle smile, a quiet war had already begun. Stage lights are always bright, but no one tells an artist how easily they can also blind. The dull headaches, the dizziness, the exhaustion he hid beneath those glittering jackets slowly grew into an unrelenting storm. In 2019, during Alabama's 50th anniversary tour, a celebration meant to mark their crowning chapter, Randy suddenly fell ill. Shows were canceled, fans went home in silence, and Randy walked off stage with his head bowed, swallowed by pain. Diagnosis: chronic vertigo and migraines. For a man who had sung his whole life, it wasn't just illness. It was tragedy. Because when music is your breath, silence feels like death. He once said, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of the day I can't sing anymore." And in that moment, those words pierced the hearts of millions. But tragedy rarely comes alone. Nearly a decade earlier, Randy had fought another battle: prostate cancer, a struggle he kept private, shared only with family and a few close friends. He left Nashville for Mexico to undergo experimental treatment. During those long months confined to a hospital bed, he didn't write, didn't perform. He just listened to the wind through the window and whispered to himself, "Will I ever have the strength to sing again?" When he finally recovered, he understood how fragile life truly was, more fleeting than any applause. Then came more losses, quiet but relentless. His father's passing left a hollow place at the table, an empty chair at every holiday. On the first Christmas without him, Randy wrote, "First Christmas Without Daddy," a song of tears and gratitude for the man who had taught him to believe in music. In 2022, his mother, the woman who once sang hymns beside him, passed away too. Randy sat by her casket in silence. After the funeral, he went home to Fort Payne, opened an old tape, and listened to her voice on a worn recording. He whispered softly, "Now she's singing somewhere higher." The losses piled up, wrapping his world in a haze of grief. Then came the hardest blow: the death of his lifelong friend and bandmate, Jeff Cook, after years battling Parkinson's disease. At the funeral, Randy stood beside Jeff's old guitar and said, "Half the music inside me is gone forever." Around the same time, Alabama became entangled in lawsuits and internal disputes, battles over royalties, contracts, and control. Men who once called each other brothers now faced one another in court. The media called it the fracture of a country legend. But Randy said only one thing: when money walks into the room, music walks out. After it all, Randy chose silence. No statements, no denials. He simply withdrew from the stage, returning to his farm in Fort Payne, the place where it all began, and perhaps where it will one day end. In those breezy Alabama afternoons, he sits on his porch, his hands trembling slightly as they touch the strings of his guitar. No audience, no applause, only the wind and the steady rhythm of his heart. Maybe this quiet, was the music he had been searching for all along. Because the greatest tragedy for an artist is not when the world forgets them, but when they must learn to live without their own song. And on a still evening in Fort Payne, they say that if you listen closely, you can still hear Randy Owen's voice. Not through a microphone, but in the very breath of the land that gave him life. After the storms, after illness, loss, and years of silence, Randy Owen quietly stepped away from the glowing stages and returned to where it had all begun, a small farm nestled among the rolling hills of Fort Payne. There, the wind still whispered through the cotton fields, and peace still lived in every morning sunrise. On that land, he was no longer the voice of Alabama, no longer the legend adored by millions. He was simply Randy, a husband, a father, and a humble man who still walked barefoot into the garden each morning, coffee cup in hand, to greet the rising sun. His wife, Kelly, remained as she had always been, quiet, patient, ever-present, waiting for him after every long road home. She understood that within her husband lived a soul full of scars, and that only the stillness of love could heal them. Randy once said, "When the lights go out, family is what stays." Inside their modest wooden home, he and Kelly raised 3 children, teaching them about faith, kindness, and the music of life. He never wanted them to chase fame, only to live truthfully, the way their father once did. In the evenings when twilight fell, Randy would take his old guitar out to the porch and sing softly to his wife. No audience, no microphones, no stage, only the sound of crickets and the breath of the earth around them. Those were his most beautiful performances, because they belonged to love, not the world. Even in his 70s, Randy never stopped giving back. He became the driving spirit behind Country Cares for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, a nationwide charity helping children with cancer. Since its founding in 1989, the campaign he inspired has raised over $800 million, saving countless young lives. Yet when asked about it, Randy simply shook his head and said, "I don't do it for recognition. I do it because I've seen children sing, even when they knew they wouldn't live to see another season." For him, music and compassion were 2 beats of the same heart. One sung aloud for the world, and one kept quietly inside. He no longer chased endless tours, but he still wrote songs, softer now, deeper, like pages from a diary written by someone who has lived through both glory and grief. He wrote about his father, his mother, his lost friend, and the hill where his childhood once lay listening to the wind sing. In a world full of noise, Randy Owen chose silence. Between fame and sorrow, he chose love. And among all the things he has lost, he has kept one thing: the light within his heart. Because for Randy, happiness isn't about being remembered. It's about still being able to sing, even if only for one person, even if only under the fading light of an Alabama evening. After all the storms and shadows, Randy Owen didn't return to music with grand declarations or headlines. He came back quietly, humbly, because he no longer had anything to prove. America had already sung along with him for more than 40 years. From small-town stages in the rural South to the massive arenas of the 1980s, Alabama achieved what no other country act had ever done before. They didn't just lift country music to commercial heights, they turned it into the heartbeat of everyday Americans. Honest, emotional, and filled with the spirit of sun-baked Southern soil. At the center of that wave stood Randy Owen, the man who sang with the soul of the South, who dared to blend country with pop and rock, and who carried faith, family, and home onto the world stage. In 2005, Alabama was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Sacred Hall of Immortals. When Randy stepped up to accept the honor, the entire room rose to its feet in applause. He spoke only a few words. "We're just farmers singing about where we come from." It was simple, but the truth of it silenced Nashville. His legacy wasn't measured in numbers, though there were plenty. Over 75 million albums sold, more than 40 #1 hits, dozens of CMA and ACM awards, and millions of hearts touched by his voice. What set Randy apart was how he made country music feel human, down to earth, modern, yet deeply rooted in its origins. The music of Alabama, of Randy Owen, became a bridge between generations. Fathers who grew up with Tennessee River and mountain music now teach those same songs to their children. From Luke Bryan to Jason Aldean, from Eric Church to Morgan Wallen, all have called Randy the Trailblazer, the man who turned country into the language of the American heart. But his greatest legacy doesn't live on the charts. It lives in compassion. For more than 30 years, Randy has been the driving heart behind Country Cares for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, the largest charitable movement in country music history, helping thousands of children battling cancer to live and to dream again. The total raised now surpasses $800 million. Yet Randy has never spoken of himself as a hero. He simply says, "I didn't save anyone. Those children saved me. They taught me to sing again, even through pain." In an age when music is often lost in fame and profit, Randy Owen remains a rare image of humility and grace. He never chased the light, yet somehow his light continues to guide others. When asked, "What makes you happiest after all these years of singing?" Randy smiled and replied, "Hearing someone still sing an Alabama song, even if it's just in their kitchen, their car, or their heart." That is the true magic of Randy Owen. His music didn't die when the stage went dark. It lives on in memories, in other voices, and in the hearts once moved by its honesty. Because sometimes, a song doesn't just change music, it changes people. And Randy Owen, in the simplest, truest way, did exactly that. His voice, needing no microphone, no spotlight, still drifts through the wind, still breathes through the soul of America, and will forever remain the voice that never fades. Now that the stage lights have dimmed and the cheers exist only in memory, Randy Owen has chosen a life of quiet simplicity, one so gentle, so grounded, it almost feels sacred. He is no longer the man standing before a sea of fans, guitar in hand, singing the songs that made history. He is a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a friend of the earth, living out his days fully and peacefully among the rolling hills of Fort Payne, where every dream he ever had was born. In the early mornings, Randy rises before the sun, when dew still clings to the wooden fences. He walks across the fields, sometimes stopping to pat the head of an old cow as if greeting an old friend. Some mornings, he sits quietly on the porch with a warm cup of coffee, watching the sun climb slowly over the hill, its soft golden light falling on a kind face that once carried the weight of fame, but now holds only peace. On the wall of his living room hang old photographs. Randy with Alabama on stage, his mother in her Sunday dress, Jeff Cook with his guitar, and his wife Kelly, smiling gently after a show. Each photo tells a story, a chapter of a life well lived, and every time Randy looks at them, he simply smiles. It's the smile of a man who has made peace with all that was gained and all that was lost. He rarely appears in public now, only on occasion at the Grand Ole Opry or at memorial events, where the audience still rises in quiet respect as he steps into the light. There are no flashing cameras, no pyrotechnics, yet when Randy Owen takes the stage, something deeply real fills the room. Warmth, presence, truth. It feels as though he never truly left music. He's simply been singing in another way. Some say Randy Owen has retired, but perhaps he has simply returned. Returned to himself, in the calm of the land. Returned to faith through the eyes of his grandchildren, who grow up listening to the songs he once wrote. And returned to his own voice, not through a microphone, but in the wind, in laughter, in quiet afternoons, watching clouds drift above the Alabama hills. He once said, "Music didn't leave me. It just changed its home, from the stage to my heart." Randy still writes songs, though no one hears them. He fills notebooks with verses, soft whispers meant only for himself, and perhaps for those who will come after. They're not loud, chart-topping anthems anymore, but slow, tender melodies that breathe like the earth itself. Songs born from a lifetime of love, loss, and grace. For Randy Owen, life now isn't an ending. It's the coda to a beautiful symphony, a final movement written with gratitude, faith, and love for music, for people, and for home. In the golden Alabama afternoon, the sunlight tilts across the fields as Randy sits in his old wooden chair, fingers gently brushing the strings of his guitar. No audience, no applause. Because a true artist, even in silence, still carries the music within. And in Fort Payne, when the wind drifts softly through the hills, people still say, it's as if Randy Owen's voice can still be heard, floating somewhere in that wide, endless Alabama sky. And perhaps, when a man has sung for the whole world, the only thing he truly needs afterward is silence, so he can finally hear himself again. After walking through both light and shadow, Randy Owen came to realize that real happiness doesn't live in the roar of a crowd, but in those still, quiet moments. When the wind moves through the fields, when a crimson sunset wraps around the small house on an Alabama hill. He once said, "All my life I lived to sing, but I've learned that sometimes silence is a song, too." In recent years, Randy has slowed down. He speaks less. He listens more. He says he's lost many things, friends, parents, health, and time itself, but in return, he's found something he never had before: understanding. Understanding the value of love, of forgiveness, and of letting go. Sometimes, in the soft light of evening, Randy sits on the porch, watching the clouds drift over the hill. A grandchild climbs into his lap and asks, "Grandpa, were you really famous?" He smiles gently and nods. "Yes, but I learned that being famous isn't as important as being kind." The child pauses, then grins. then you're the best person I know." Those words bring tears to Randy's eyes, for perhaps that is the greatest title he has ever earned. In his heart now, there is no bitterness toward the painful years, no regret for the lights that have gone out. Only gratitude. Grateful for having once had a dream. Grateful for being able to share it with the world. And grateful that, after everything, he is still here. Still breathing, still hearing the wind, still watching the sunrise each morning. Randy no longer writes about sorrow. He writes about forgiveness, about faith, about the quiet beauty of ordinary life. Those songs aren't meant to be released, because they aren't written for the audience anymore. They're written for his soul. He once said, "Every artist wants to be remembered for something. I just want to be remembered as someone who sang with his heart." And perhaps that honesty, not the gold records, not the trophies, is Randy Owen's greatest legacy. The way he lived, quietly, kindly, and full of light. As evening falls over the hills of Fort Payne, the cotton fields turn pale gold beneath the last light of day. Inside a small wooden house on that sacred land, Randy Owen sits quietly in an old chair, a weathered guitar resting on his knee. His fingers trace the strings, softly, slowly, like a whisper of breath. No more lights, no more cheers. Only the wind moving through the open window and the faint echo of a soul still singing in silence. That voice, once heard by millions, once powerful enough to make America stop and listen, now rises only for himself, for those he loves, and for the land that gave him life. And strangely enough, in that quiet, his music has become more eternal than ever. Because there are voices that do not need a stage to live on. There are souls that do not need applause to be remembered. They live inside the hearts of those who once listened, once wept, once smiled because of a song. And Randy Owen, the humble Southern farmer who sang with his heart, will forever be one of those souls. His music still lives, not on charts or awards, but in the hum of old radios, in the rumble of trucks along Alabama highways, and in the soft voices of people carrying the dream of country music forward. Because country isn't just a genre, it's the way people tell their truth in sound. Now, as the sun sets once more, Randy Owen no longer needs the spotlight. He has found what he searched for all his life: peace, both in his music and within himself. And perhaps, somewhere across the Alabama sky, that voice still drifts, gentle as the wind, deep as the soil, and beautiful as memories that never fade. If you've ever smiled at "Feels So Right," ever felt your heart stir with "My Home's in Alabama," or ever found strength in mountain music, then, in that moment, Randy Owen is still singing for you. And now, as this story comes to a close, I want to ask you one thing. Which memory of Randy Owen moves your heart the most? Share your thoughts below in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us so that his voice and the voices of a golden generation of country legends will continue to echo forever.